My name's James Walsh, and I've spent most of my professional career in St. Louis. When I was a graduate student in psychology and physiology there, my mentor, Don Tepes, got a grant to study the sleep of shift workers. And in those days, you could get a grant even if you didn't have a sleep lab, as long as you said you'd build one, and even if you had no preliminary data. So we were awarded the grant by NIOSH and proceeded to build a sleep lab and did some the first both survey and physiologic studies of shift workers sleeping at various times of the day. After I got my PhD, I went with Dr. Tepes to Illinois Institute of Technology, built him a sleep lab there, and shortly thereafter, I moved to the University of Cincinnati after Tom Roth had gone to Detroit. And at the University of Cincinnati, I worked with Dr. Milt Kramer as assistant director in the Sleep Disorder Center, and did some interesting work on gastroesophageal reflux in young infants with Dr. Michael Farrell. I was there in Cincinnati for roughly a year and a half, after which my wife was from the St. Louis area. She wanted to move back, and we were fortunate enough that the first sleep center in the St. Louis area was opening at Deaconess Hospital. I gave grand rounds there, and they hired me to be the first director. Spent about 12 years at Deaconess, and then moved to St. Luke's Hospital and was the founding director of the sleep center there, and I finished my career there in 2016. I got involved in the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. Fortuitously, I had become friends with Bill Dement. Everyone knows Dr. Dement. And he gave me a few tasks to do, low-level tasks, and I guess I did them well enough that he kept on getting me involved in a variety of things. And in those days, this would be roughly 1980 or 81, I believe. I was on the Academy board. It was then called the American Sleep Disorders. No, it was the Association for Sleep Disorder Centers. And the way I got on the board was Bill asked me, do you want to be on the board? I said yes, and he said, okay, you're on the board. And that's how the board was constituted in those days. And I spent a number of years on the board of directors, served as secretary-treasurer, president, government affairs chair for a number of years. Some of my memories about serving with the ASDC and then the AASM, probably the most important things I was involved in dealt with the establishment of the National Commission on Sleep Disorders Research, which was a NIH activity that Congress requested to determine how the federal government should investigate, fund sleep research and sleep disorders. I served as a special advisor to the commission. Once again, Dr. Dement asked me to do that. And I think in addition to just being the chairman of the insomnia subcommittee of the commission, at that time I was president of the ASDA, and Bill was, like he was in so many areas, very insightful, and he knew that if the commission issued a report and it didn't have the support of the professional societies, that it would not be nearly as effective as it would be with the support. And so I became a liaison during the National Commission activities, and subsequent to that, when I helped Bill write the final report, which was, I think we wrote it in the month of February in 1991 or two, It was submitted to Congress, and Congress, thanks to Senator Mark Hatfield and Senator Ted Kennedy, when the NIH Reauthorization Act of 1993 was approved in Congress, that included the establishment of the National Center for Sleep Disorders Research. At that time, there was some controversy in the field because we had to work with NIH to find an institute to house the National Center. At that time, they were no longer establishing any more institutes or freestanding centers. And there was controversy because most of the funding for sleep research up until that time had actually been from the National Institute of Mental Health, and also the Neurology Institute. And I think third or fourth or fifth on the list was the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. But when Bill Dement and I, and a few others, including Alan Pack, on some visits, when we went around visiting all the National Center directors, we were met with, I would say, somewhere from most directors, somewhere between apathy and kind disinterest, with one exception, and that was Dr. Claude L'Enfant, who is the director of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. When we met with him, I remember his words, paraphrased words very well. He said, if Congress and the NIH director give the National Center for Sleep Disorders Research to my institute, I will do the best possible job I can to promote sleep science in the sleep field. To say that we were a little bit surprised at his enthusiasm would be an understatement, and I vividly remember walking out of his office at NHLBI, looking at Bill Dement and I've never seen Bill Dement smile so broadly for so long. That was a real rewarding moment. Starting the Sleep Center in 1981, especially since I was a PhD, was a real challenge. First of all, in the city of St. Louis, there were no physicians that were trained in even with one disorder, much less one sleep disorder. And so my major role, quite honestly, was to teach physicians about sleep medicine and polysomnography, and to be their right-hand person. I would do most of the reading of the sleep studies, as was done by probably dozens of PhDs in those days. And then over a period of months or years, we developed one internist, one pulmonologist, as I recall, to be fairly sophisticated and interested in managing sleep patients. Also in those days, sleep centers were a little bit different because in a lot of places they served more as laboratories as opposed to a clinical environment. And that's how our center started. We would do sleep studies, make recommendations to primary care doctors, ENT doctors, pulmonary physicians about treatment options. But then as soon as we began to get several physicians interested in sleep medicine to make it, a substantial part of their clinical activity, they naturally gravitated to wanting to manage patients. And that was somewhat difficult because primary care doctors didn't want to lose their patients, and pulmonary doctors, et cetera. But over time, the referring doctors found the added value of having our physicians take care of the patients, and our psychologists were very popular because they would take insomnia patients off the hands of a lot of physicians I would say that whole process of going from a semi-busy laboratory type involvement with a heavy research emphasis, because that was my area of interest and expertise, probably took about 10 years until we really had made the total transition over to a sleep medicine center as opposed to a sleep laboratory. So very early on, when I was on the board, I can remember that insurance coverage for any aspect of sleep medicine was meager. And if I have my timeline correct, Bill Dement made some headway in the late 70s, maybe early 80s, with Blue Cross Blue Shield in California. And shortly after that, I went with Bill and probably 2 or 3 others to meet with HCFA officials, now CMS, in DC. And we spent about an hour with them, and they had no idea what we were talking about. And we honestly didn't know what we needed to tell them, other than, we were telling them, well, this is what we know about a few sleep disorders, and this is how we manage it. But there was no track record. And I think it was about probably 6 or 8 years later that another group from the academy, Phil Westbrook was involved, Mayor Krieger was involved, and others had a much more productive meeting with, I don't know if they were still HCFA or CMS at the time, but that was the inroad toward CMS funding. Another historical note that probably shouldn't be totally lost with time is when the Academy was developing, the Sleep Research Society had been around for 15 or more years, and there was some animosity. Some of the early sleep research pioneers did not have any interest in a medical discipline, and I think felt that the more researchers that got involved with the Association for Sleep Disorder Centers and the ASDA, that it would weaken the sleep field, and in particular weaken the Sleep Research Society. And I suppose to some degree that happened, but because of all those concerns about long-term viability and things of that nature and how to grow the field, we had endless in the most profound sense of the word, conversations between leaders in the Academy and leaders in SRS about how to work together. And we drafted articles of federation multiple times, and probably over 5 years. And none of it ever came to fruition, even though we thought we were going to come up with a satisfactory arrangement, including the Association of Polysomnographic Technologists at that time. But other than having a joint meeting and a joint journal, the two groups, to the best of my recollection, never really commingled. We had a board of directors of the Associated Professional Sleep Societies, with representatives from the Academy and SRS and the APT, but we never did take the final step and join all as one professional group, which in my humble opinion was the right move. And both groups, I think, flourished over the next decade or so because their agenda wasn't watered down by the other group's agenda, essentially. The story of how the Associated Professional Sleep Societies, that moniker was developed, we were in one of our many conversations about a federation and what it would be called. And some of the old guard, in particularly Mike Chase and Al Rechtschaffen, never did like the change from the Association for the Psychophysiological Study of Sleep to the Sleep Research Society. And so it was Al Rechtschaffen that proposed we establish a new name for the meeting of the joint societies using the acronym APSS, and the best they could come up with was Associated Professional Sleep Societies, a name that I detested, I still detest, and I was very glad when a number of years ago someone made the decision to rename the meeting Sleep and the annual year. That's much more satisfactory in my opinion. Yeah, Tom Roth and I were the only individuals to serve as president of the Academy, the SRS, and the National Sleep Foundation. When I was president of the National Sleep Foundation, David White, I think Larry Epstein, and other individuals on the Academy board hired Jerry Barrett. And I interacted with Jerry as a representative of the National Sleep Foundation and also as president of the Sleep Research Society over a number of years. And Jerry, I think, because he was a professional organization person, experienced at least with the Chicago Medical Society and probably other groups that I'm unaware of, he had some great ideas, and the bottom line is I think he did wonders for the Academy. But in the early days, you know, he was going to do things his way, or at least advise people in such a way that he thought was best. And so there were some rough times because it was a totally different type of staff leadership. But ultimately, as I said, it worked out very, very well. He was very sophisticated in medical societies and insurance companies and reimbursement, and also had a track record of lobbying, interacting with mostly state, but some federal officials as well. And so those are all things that scientists learn, but they're not really professionally groomed for those types of roles. And so I thought he brought a lot to the table in that regard, and certainly put the Academy on a solid foundation, both professionally and financially. He was also very skilled at recognizing how to protect his societal members and their field. And so he was very deft in working either with or against other professional organizations to make sure that his membership got the best arrangement as possible, regardless of the situation. When I was active in the Sleep Research Society, we did not have, when I first started on the board, we did not have a government representative in Washington. And when I was, years prior to that, when we were doing the National Commission and the National Sleep Center development with the Academy, we had hired Dale Dirks and the Health and Medicine Council of Washington as our advocate. And he worked for the Academy for probably 10 years or so, but then they didn't renew his contract because they had enough in-house congressional or governmental expertise. And so when I moved to the SRS, my experience with Dale Dirks and his group and how things get done in Washington was something that the SRS needed at that time. So the SRS One of the major concerns they have is obviously sleep research funding, not only from the NIH, but from the Veterans Administration and Department of Energy and many other government agencies. And so at the SRS, I encouraged the board to hire Dirks, and Dirks worked for the SRS for probably 12 or more years. And we succeeded in driving up federal funding for sleep research quite a bit, and in large part because of our strong government affairs program. I should also mention that in between Mr. Dirks working for the Academy and the SRS, he also was the government affairs representative when I was on the board of the National Sleep Foundation. So Dale and I had roughly 25 or 30 years of working together with 3 different organizations with largely the same purpose of making sure that all aspects of the sleep field, both the clinical side, the patient advocacy side, and the research side, all got support from the federal agencies. I would say from the late 1970s to present day, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine is the organization that is principally responsible for elevating the body of knowledge of sleep medicine, but perhaps more importantly, raising awareness of sleep and its impact on all aspects of health. And because of the Academy, the phrase that we used at the end of the National Commission report, which was actually coined by Senator Mark Hatfield, that he said at a field hearing in Portland that America was a vast reservoir of ignorance about sleep and sleep disorders and sleep deprivation. And so that was a great quote to end the National Commission report with, or maybe it started with, I don't remember. But getting back to what the Academy has done, in addition to training, innumerable physicians through their programs and things of that nature, and spreading sleep medicine around internationally, they've been very active in that regard. I would have to point to the fact that almost everyone in the United States now has some appreciation that sleep and nutrition and exercise are the pillars of health. We don't always act that way, either sleep-wise or exercise-wise or our eating habits, but people have an awareness through, innumerable articles that members have been interviewed for, and the annual meeting always got heavy press attention, especially in the 1980s and 1990s when sleep was so new. So I would say elevating the consciousness of sleep and sleep health is probably what the Academy should be most proud of. One of the real challenges we had in the 1970s, mid to late 1970s, was the major professional sleep medicine organization, the Association for Sleep Disorder Centers, was a society, and the members were the actual centers at various hospitals and academic institutions around the country. And Phil Westbrook and others were adamant that the field needed a entry port for individual physicians and individual scientists so that they could join a group that had a meeting that served their needs, that would produce a journal and have educational opportunities, and not just focus for the association, not to just focus on sleep centers and accreditation and things of that nature. And so at that time, Phil Westbrook and others working hand in hand with the ASDC, formed the Clinical Sleep Society, which was a membership-based organization. And so that was probably in the early 80s, I would guess. And it started out with perhaps 50 members and grew, by leaps and bounds over the next 3 or 4 years. And I don't remember exactly how long the Clinical Sleep Society lasted. I don't think it was too much longer than 3 or 5 years. But that was an important step in the development of the field, and that's one of the major reasons that the organization's name was changed from the American Sleep Disorders Association to the American Sleep Disorders, or from the ASDC to the ASDA, American Sleep Disorders Association, so that the organization could have both individual members as well as center members.